You want to know what's sad in this modern world of gaming? Besides the obvious downloadable content, microtransactions, so on and such forth, is have you actually ever took the time to read articles when they're announcing a brand new game? Like travel back in time and read the comments to when fucking NetherRealm's Warner Brothers announced a season pass even before MKX had been released. You can travel to this modern time frame right now and search Street Fighter V DLC and once again read the comments. The one thing that you're going to find prevalent between the idiocracy of these fanboys and fangirls is they seem to be more hyped for the DLC and or potential DLC rather than the actual game itself. And if that isn't something that is fucking wrong, I don't know what is. Why don't we just destroy this fucking shit too? Because that's what we do here on Gamer Rant. We destroy idiocracy. Now, how this video came about, I was actually watching EventStatus. A link to the video I was watching is in the description box below, because if you're not watching him, you should be, alright? That's just pretty much the evidence of it, alright? If you like me, if you like Artificial, you're gonna like him. He also talks about sports. I personally am not a big sports guy, but if you like sports, then you'll also like it when he does that stuff too. He does sports and video games. So there you go. Link in the description box below to his video. But nonetheless, he started talking about Street Fighter V, so I went and I checked out, jumped ahead of the video and started reading articles, and then I started going into reading mostly the comments, because I always find it intriguing to read comments, especially when they pertain to DLC. And the one thing that I took notice of, well, reading comments for Street Fighter V, so-called potential DLC, is that more people were actually hyped for potential downloadable characters that they would have to pay for rather than the actual game itself. Which is actually pretty fucking sad. I mean, it's not the best game. Okay, it's actually a horrendous game within of itself, alright? Outside of the context of maybe Special Forces and Sub-Zero mythologies, it's probably definitely up there in the top 3 worst Mortal Kombat games, and that is Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe. That was a game that, yes, even though it was on, the fucking modern consoles at the time, it was a game that was relatively, people were wanting, alright? The hype was more towards the game rather than any kind of DLC that had or had not been announced for that game. You travel even further back in time. In fact, let's jump to the Nintendo 64 era, when the Nintendo 64 in general had been announced, and Super Mario 64 had been announced. People saw the trailer to that, alright? The hype, the joys, what people's expectations. I mean, there's just so many different words to describe what people were feeling at the time when they saw this, Super Mario 64, the Nintendo 64, and the hype was there for the game itself. I mean, the anticipation to play it, it looked great, it looked amazing, it looked fun, it looked entertaining. Where is that feeling right there? Because, I mean, you could go further back in time to fucking the Super Nintendo, the Dreamcast, the Sega Saturn, even the Atari. Even though I hear there's not a lot of good games on the Atari, I'm still sure that there was games that even were released on the Atari where people were more hyped about the game itself, being able to fucking play it. I mean, granted, yes, it totally would suck if they got a hold of the game and it actually bombed fucking donkey balls, alright? It just sucked beyond all reasonable doubt, like Quest 64. I have not played it, but I've heard that game is some pretty fucked up shit, alright? And obviously that's on the Nintendo 64, not the Atari, alright? Obviously that should have been obvious from the 64, Quest 64. Anyway, yeah. You know, what happened to the passion and the hype of the actual game? You know, back in the day, talking with people, not necessarily people online, you know, when we're getting back to the Nintendo, Atari, that kind of generation, it was mostly probably buddies at school, and talking about the hype of a game. And even when you get into the realm of when the internet pretty much first started and what machines did exist at that time, the hype of even conversing with people on the internet at that time for the current machines and talking about the hype of specific games. You know, what happened to that type of hype? It's almost as if people don't really get hyped for games anymore. They seem to get more hyped about the downloadable content. I mean, it doesn't matter what the game is. People end up telling people on the internet their expectations of what they hope, what kind of DLC will appear for this game. I mean, they did this even with Skyrim before any of the actual DLC. No, excuse me, let's not insult the expansion packs for Skyrim. Before even any of the expansion packs had been announced or known, people started to, you know, get into that hype for what kind of expansion packs would be coming. Now, granted, I can understand that because, you know, we're talking about an expansion pack, not this minuscule bullshit DLC that we see in, you know, the like fighting games, Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, so on and so forth. Basically stuff that amounts to absolutely nothing, where it's pretty much quantity rather than quality. You know, Skyrim expansion packs are pretty much just about any expansion pack on a motherfucking video game. You know, so I can understand hype for expansion packs. I can understand people, especially if a particular franchise like the Elder Scrolls is known for releasing expansion packs. I could see people getting hyped. But even then, it's still that iteration that, yeah, there's still hype around the game, but there's not a lot of hype around the expansion packs that may or may not come. But yet, when you transition over to the minuscule bullshit of DLC, just to go and read the comments on a YouTube video talking about a particular game, even if DLC had not been announced for it, like Batman Arkham Knight, you can actually find YouTube videos of people talking about the game before any DLC had actually been known, and people's expectations to what kind of DLC was going to be created. Once again, getting into that area that people are more hyped for the nickel and diming of DLC rather than the actual game itself. People are more worried about DLC than the quality of the game that they're going to be getting. It's actually really shameful when you honestly think about it, that in this modern generation, people are getting more hyped for DLC than the actual game itself. I mean, I'm 31 years old, so, you know, I grew up in an era where, you know, the Nintendo 64 had been introduced, obviously PlayStation 2, obviously also PlayStation, and so on, PlayStation, and like the Dreamcast, and I'm sure there was a few Segas, but a lot of the older machines I myself didn't play because my parents never picked them up. In fact, the first machine that my parents actually picked up was the Nintendo 64. It wasn't until my parents got the Nintendo 64, then they also went and they bought a PlayStation, and then they also went and they actually ended up getting a fucking NES and a Super NES. So see, even then, even though these machines existed during my childhood, I actually started basically gaming on some of the older machines a lot later. But even then, even though I started later, there was still that anticipation for, because I did start playing the PlayStation 1 long before the PlayStation 2 had been announced. And, to sit there and to read about games that were coming out for it and the anticipation and the hype of waiting to play that game. I mean, just the feeling, of the anticipation from a gamer as yourself, all right? I'm sure you felt this same thing for games. And yet, now it seems that there's more hype for the downloadable content or potential downloadable content rather than the actual game itself. I mean, could you imagine? Let's just, sit here and imagine if Super Mario 64 was released right here, right now in this modern generation. I mean, because Nintendo has started to dabble in downloadable content. Would people be just as hyped and excited as they were when it was originally released? Or would the majority of people be more hyped and excited and talking about what kind of downloadable content to expect for Super Mario 64? Just some food for thought. Because it is real shameful that in this modern generation, before a game is even out on store shelves, people are more hyped about potential DLC. When it's found out that a game is going to have DLC, but there's little to no information about it, people are more hyped about potential DLC than the actual game itself. And I don't know about you, but that's probably the most shameful thing that DLC has done to gaming. Taken away that hype, that self-satisfaction, need and want to try and to play a game, to where a lot of these gamers are getting more hyped for the extra crap that should have already been in the game that they got to pay for anyway. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video in some fashion or form. A link to EventStatus's video is in the description box below if you'd like to go check it out. You can. I'm not gonna lie. I'm gonna be too lazy. I'm not gonna link to any of the articles. So if you want to go check out some of the articles, he's got a whole list of them in his description box on his video. All right. I'm Gamer Rant. Hope you enjoyed this video in some fashion or form. And remember, gamers, if you're not voicing your thoughts and concerns about gamers being more hyped for potential or the actual downloadable content of a game rather than the actual game itself, you just might be a part of the motherfucking problem.